So I want to take some time to establish some agreements for this workshop today. We hope that people get a chance to actively participate. We say we have models one mic, which means when one person is talking, we let other people talk. Also, we respect others' voices and opinions. We encourage you to be curious, ask questions. You might hear something that sounds different from what you might be taught or told. And also, it's a lot easier if you see your smiling faces during this. So if you can, please be on camera. All right. So now we're going to do some predictions, assumptions, and disclaimers. Some of you might not actually be ready for your first appointment. All right. So this might not feel immediately applicable. That's okay. We're just learning some things now so that when it's time, you're ready. We also assume that you'll have questions. Feel free to just jump right in and ask questions. You can throw it in the chat and come off mic. Also, these are our personal experiences and advice and tips. Disclaimer, this is not legal advice, all right? So we're giving you tips and tricks, but we're not offering legal advice today in this workshop. So like I said earlier, Josh and I will be the ones talking the most and leading you through this workshop today. Although I work for Fab Youth Philly, I also am a licensed real estate agent. And so I've helped people find their first apartments and walk them through the first steps. So I'm hoping to share some of that knowledge with you all. And we asked Josh to join us today because Josh has some experience also with getting his first apartment. So Josh, can you talk briefly about how many apartments have you rented so far? And in brief, what were those experiences like for you?
So the apartment that I'm now is my first official apartment that I've rented. But I've been apartments on my own.
Awesome. So the first question is, why rent? So I'll start this with Josh. Josh, why did you decide to rent your first apartment?
Well, let's see. I wanted to rent my first apartment to kind of trying to get away from my parents. You know, when you're living in your house, you have to live under their rules. So if you have your own place, you can kind of have that freedom to be an adult and branch out and do what you need to do.
And I would like also to open it up to everyone else in the workshop. What are some reasons that you think you might rent in the future? So I'll take a couple minutes and take a minute and throw some things in the chat. What are some reasons we may have for renting our first apartment?
Ramla, that's exactly what I was thinking, what you put in the chat.
Can you read that in the chat? Just read it out loud, Joy, in case folks might be on their phone and can't see the chat.
So Ramla said it could end up being cheaper than paying room and board if you're in college, which is so true. Oh, there's stuff in the chat.
Tamik said, just like Josh, to have your own freedom to do what you want and being independent. I don't want to mispronounce your name, but another participant says stability, especially if you are in a new area by yourself. From Zenzui. If I said your name wrong, please correct me. Any other reasons why we think we might want to rent your very first apartment?
Wait, Zenzi, do you want to say your name so we know?
Yes, you can call me Zenzi, but my full name, if you want to, I guess, give it a kick, is Zenziwe.
Zenziwe.
Yes.
Thank you for correcting me. Appreciate it. Anyone else? I knew, as most others, I was ready to rent, because I was ready to move out of my parents' house. So that's often a good enough reason to start renting and some independence to move on your own. So when you want to go to renting, sometimes you need to talk about creating a budget. There's this helpful financial advice. It's not a golden rule, but they tell you the 50-30-20 rule, which you use 50% of the money that you're making towards your needs, and that includes housing. So you don't want to spend too much more on rent an apartment than you can actually afford. So you definitely don't want to spend more than 50% of your check on housing. Josh, can you talk a little bit about how you created your own budget when you were ready to move out?
So just like you said, I had to make a list of my needs and write out how much that would cost. Renting a house is not just about rent. It's about like utilities, and internet's now a necessity. So internet, transportation, food, all of this has to come into account. So once I figured out like the medium, how much I was paying a month on those things, I could then figure out a budget and see what I was looking for towards an apartment.
So it sounds like first creating a budget was essential, right? You need to break it down to what you needed. Was there anything that you were not expecting that ended up costing you some money that you were like, oh, I never thought about that?
So definitely, I guess for me, nothing, I guess moving was the most expensive for me. Like the actual process of moving. Rebecca helped me out a lot. But there are some things that, I did have to pay to come to my house, especially furniture. And then paying people to bring the furniture upstairs because I cannot lift a couch by myself, or a fridge. So like things like that. Also furnishing your apartment. I made the big bad decision to do it all at once instead of doing it like as time progressed, pick up a little thing here and there. But yeah, those are some of the things that I ran into.
Thank you. I think it's easy to think about, oh, I have to pay, let's say $1,500 a month. I can do that. But, at the time of moving, you're looking to spend, first month rent, last month rent, and security deposit. So we say up to 3 months upfront. Application fees. A lot of apartments will charge you to run application, which includes a credit check, which make sure that you are able to pay anything goes wrong. And that's sometimes unexpected. You like budget exactly, and then this $50 you weren't expecting comes out of nowhere, you don't know about. Josh talked about moving expenses. Not all of us are able to, sometimes we have friends in the area that can help us out, sometimes we don't. So physically moving your stuff from point A to point B, or you might have friends, but no one has a car. So moving your stuff from point A to point B can be expensive sometimes. Utilities, we all need internet. We might not do, seem like the chat's having some fun. You might not do cable, but you guys still got, who's paying for Netflix and Hulu and all the other streaming services we have now. And then you move in and you're like, oh, this is great. You have no bed, you have no couch, you have nowhere to put your clothes. And then your small kitchen appliances, so even like your iron, it's things that you don't think of that you might need. So those costs are adding up very quickly. And as Rebecca mentioned, the application fees, if you don't get the apartment, you're out that money. We have a question in the chat. With the up to 3 months rent up front, does this number increase or decrease depending on the lease length? I want to say yes or no. The reason why I say that is because there are some places that will do deals. So I say up to 3 months because in Pennsylvania, you can't charge more than up to 3 months upfront. So technically, sometimes you might see pet fees and all that stuff should all still not include more than 3 months upfront. When I say 3 months upfront, I mean the total cost. So your apartment is $1,000 a month. When you sign that lease, you're often paying the first month rent, a security deposit, and then also your last month rent. So that's why I say up to 3 months. So you might be spending up to $3,000 at that time. Does that make sense?
And the security deposit, sorry, Josh, go ahead.
I saw a question. It said that does that mean that you don't have to pay rent for the next 3 months? No, that does not. your first month's rent is your first month's rent, and you still have to pay your second month's rent when that's due. Just the 3 months of rent up front is for your first month, it's for your last month, the month that you're moving out, so that you're covered. Like the landlord doesn't have to worry if they're going to get that money or not. And then the security deposit to cover the cost of like repainting or cleaning or any damages to the apartment, which you do get back if you do a really good job of being a really good tenant.
That's exactly right. And some apartments will offer you deals. So you can, if some place will say, if you stop for 2 years, you might have a different deal where you don't have to put as much money down up front, but you're locked into a longer agreement. So there are some variations, but I say up to 3 months, because in Pennsylvania, technically, that's the maximum amount you can put up to move in. Any other questions about first month, last month security costs? Security deposit, I'm sorry.
I have a question for the group. I guess I'm just wondering if folks are surprised to know that you have to have up to 3 months of rent in your pocket. Because I think about when I was 19, 20 years old, when I didn't have $3,000 saved up. And so also thinking about, and I'm sure Michael and Joshua will talk about this, the benefit of renting with a roommate or two and being able to split some of those costs. But I know when I was 19, I didn't have $3,000 saved up.
Actually, I want to pause right now and talk about roommates. So sometimes when you're like looking at these numbers, and you're trying to figure out if you can do it your own, next question is there somebody out there that I'm willing to live with and have a cost? For those of you who are in college or been in college, sometimes you learn that your best friend is actually your best roommate, right? So figuring out who you can live with is also a challenge, but that also makes everything a lot easier. Josh, did you choose to have roommates? If not, if so, yeah, why? If not, why?
So I did have, not at this apartment. I don't have roommates at this apartment. Oh, excuse me. I don't have a roommate at this apartment. At the last, I guess I could call that like a renting establishment. At the last place I was living, I did have roommates at 5. Having a roommate is, I don't know. I think when I leave this place, I might go back for a roommate, only because I'm in school now, and being in school and trying to manage an apartment is really, really, really difficult. A lot of times you don't have the time to work 2 jobs or 40-hour shifts to make that rent payment. When I chose this apartment, I wasn't planning on going back to school. So I knew that I could afford what I have. I also ran into like a really good opportunity with this program called AIC, which helped me get my apartment. That's another story. But yeah, that's my experience with roommates. I mean, it was pretty good. My roommates were nice. I got to know them. I got to meet them and hang out with them before I moved in with them. Which is the case with some of them. Like most people would want to know who they're coming to live with. So. Oh, you muted, Michael.
I want to answer a quick question in the chat, and then we'll go back to roommates in a second. Ramla asked, if you don't have a credit card yet, can you just use your parents? So I'm assuming we're talking about the putting the month's rent up front. That usually has to be done with cash or check. It depends on the establishment, or they will charge you extra to use a credit card. No, some places does let you use credit card. Oh, for the credit check, yes. Typically, you're allowed to. It's an online portal. You can use a credit card for that stuff, but that varies apartment to apartment. Or I said landlord to landlord. Some landlords are completely offline and they want everything done in paper and want cash and a check. Good luck with that, but it really depends on the apartment.
I think they mean for the credit score check. Can they use their parents' credit card? Credit history.
Oh, so we will talk a little about cosigners in a little bit. That's a helpful thing to jump into. I want to stay on roommates for a second. Does anyone else have experiences with choosing roommates or not choosing roommates? That they want to talk about or make a decision that they're liked or regretted?
I can go. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, basically, I was sharing an apartment with a few people that we were all friends with, and usually, when you're sharing an apartment with your friends, you're kind of, I don't know, you kind of expect that you guys will be on like mutual terms about like living conditions. So there, like a lot of difficulty did rise during that time, but it was a lot easier because of the fact that we were friends to talk it out and discuss our needs and our wants for the living conditions. But it still just kind of reminded me that like next time when choosing roommates or choosing someone to live with, I should more so ask them about their living conditions and what they're used to, and just kind of assuming that, I don't know, we're on the same page.
That makes sense. Thanks for sharing. So someone else raised their hand to answer the question about roommates. Go for it. Just hop off mic.
Oh, well, I had rented an apartment through like subletting, like from somebody else. And like one thing that we tried to do as roommates was to have like weekly meetings where we communicated, because we knew we had to understand that we are from different backgrounds and we all do things differently. So we were trying to find like a meeting point. And I mean, I guess it's a good thing to do, but I think where it kind of like, sort of failed is when like, people are not listening to each other actually. Like you're hearing me talk about these issues and trying to adjust and, but if you're not listening and trying to, compromise and that kind of thing, it just makes it so much harder to coexist. But I do think that, the general solution of having weekly meetings where you guys communicate in case like feelings from last week changed and what have you, like is a good thing. It just, I guess, depends on who you do it with for the outcome to be just as good as the, yeah.
No, that's a great point. And that's something that you have to balance, right? You're like, it'll be cheaper to live with roommates, but it can be a headache sometimes as the wrong person. Which way do I go? That's a personal decision, but it's pros and cons on both sides. I thank you all for sharing your experiences. Joy?
I just wanted to share a quick example of splitting up chores. I had a roommate in grad school and she insisted on cleaning the bathroom. She said, I like to clean the bathroom a certain way. I want to be in charge of the bathroom. You be in charge of the kitchen. This girl never cooked. So I was just cleaning up only my stuff, first of all. Second of all, I would say, oh, the bathroom is getting dirty. Hey, are you having a rough week? I can clean the bathroom for you this time. And she would say, no, I want to do it. But then the bathroom would go so long without being cleaned. So I had to get on her a little bit about that. So even when you have it split up a certain way, it can still be difficult to stick to it. Just wanted to share.
Sorry you went through that. It doesn't sound like fun. So ways to search for an apartment. The internet is your friend here. But before we even jump to the internet stuff, I want to mention your personal network. You may have friends or family who maybe someone might be renting an apartment that might not be advertised, but it might be a lot cheaper than stuff you see on the internet. So once you're looking for an apartment, I would advise you, hop on your whatever social media and say, hey, is anyone looking for a roommate? Or anyone knows for an apartment? Here's my budget. And honestly, that's a great way to find an apartment. My first apartment was a basement apartment that was way below market. Just some lady that worked at my job was looking for a tenant that they can trust. And I was able to get a great deal on a place. So use your personal network. I'm not just saying this because I'm a real estate agent, but also in Pennsylvania, it's totally free for you to use a real estate agent to help you search. They could be the ones to find the stuff for you, send it to you, and then also go with you to check out all these different places. So they're helpful resources. It costs you nothing. If you're not feeling the right person, then you can try somebody else. But It's totally a free resource that you can use. Rebecca mentioned a Facebook group that she finds helpful. And then we've seen Zillow and apartments.com, and there's a bunch of other, I think realtor.com. There's a bunch of like online search engines for apartments. Facebook also is a good resource for that stuff too, but same thing, you might find roommate situations that might work out. I'm not sure if people still use Craigslist, but different social media forums or might be a way. And then local housing organizations. I'm gonna go back to Josh here. Josh, how did you find out about your apartments?
So during my apartment search, I was doing all of like the Zillow and the apartments.com. I also, my job was a really big resource for me moving. I currently work at the Monkey and Elephant, which is on 29th and Girard. They have a lot of resources for youth in the foster care system that are in need of housing. So they have people on their board of directors that are landlords. You know, if you can financially handle, you know, being in your own apartment, then, you know, maybe that's something that you could talk to with the board members and they can help that out. Me personally, I found mines on apartment.com, as well as the agency that helped me get the apartment. They talked to the landlord. They were all ready to go. The move-in was quick, fast, and simple. Took me about, I think, 2 weeks, 3 weeks to move in. Yeah. They needed to do some work on the apartment, and then after that, the keys were mine.
Sounds pretty straightforward. Anyone else has any advice about searching for apartments that they found helpful when they were looking for their apartments? If something jogs your memory later, we can always throw it in the chat. But I'll come back also before the Zoom is over. I'll talk a little bit more about some local house organizations that we can rely on within Philadelphia. Joel, you had a comment?
There's something in the chat.
Yeah, so there was a question that said, can you ask your landlord to fix something before moving in? Yes, yes, yes. When I first saw this apartment, the representative that I work with took pictures and she sent it to me. Because, you know, COVID, it's really difficult to get viewing. It was really difficult to get viewings in. I hated my door. I hated the floors. I remember telling Rebecca, I don't think I want to go with this apartment. It looks really shady. It looks really sketchy. I just told my landlord about it. I'm like, you know, I'm not really comfortable with the door like this. I don't really like the water pressure. They came in and they fixed all of that before I moved in. And she didn't tell me that she fixed it. I just came in for a viewing one day and everything was like a whole different apartment. So, yeah, you can definitely ask your landlord to fix things. I would say up to the first month that you move in. So like if you notice any issues within the first month or two that you move in, to avoid having to pay for that, I would tell your landlord right away. Anything with the locks, anything with the water, gas, any problems you're having, let them know right away.
And I didn't include this in the presentation, but I would say all communications with a landlord or their representatives, please make sure it's written, even with text messages or emails, because if anything ever happens, that's proof, right, that you told them about this stuff. And as I was about to mention, as Rebecca mentioned in the chat, before you even move any of your stuff in, take photos and document everything, video everything, so that when you move out, you can say, this is how I found the place and this is how I'm returning the space. So that's really, really good to like come in and say, hey, this is not working properly. What can we do? And when we go over, which is coming up soon, like look at your lease, you can sometimes include some of that stuff in there as well. Saying, hey, when I came in, the fridge wasn't working. I'm not responsible for any damage that's done or for the fridge. So that kind of stuff language can be also put in the lease so that it protects you. Any other questions before we move on? All right, so I'm gonna jump to signing a lease. There's various forms of leases. The one I'm utilizing is the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors standard lease. This is the first page. I picked out certain sections that I think might be useful for us today. So the next I'm going to go to is the length of lease. This is important because you can have your starting date. So they say, hey, you moving in January 1st, and it's a year lease until January 1st, 2023. That will be noted here. If your lease is month to month, that will be noted here as well. So this is the first place I like to stop and make sure that we're on the same page. Not all deals are created equal. Some places will have you do a year lease, 2-year lease, 16-month lease. So this is where you'll be able to figure out exactly what you're expected to fulfill. Because if you leave a little bit early, you might be considered breaking your lease, and then you might have some payment issues. So this is the first place to really check to make sure that you and the landlord are on the same page. Anything to add here before I move on? Joy?
I have a question. Can you or Josh talk about pros and cons of a short lease versus a long lease?
I guess I'll go first. But from what I've learned, the pros and cons of a long lease. So I don't have to worry about my rent going up, at least until my lease is over. The landlord can raise your rent after your lease is over. So if you're having a month to month, they could, raise it a couple dollars. Having a short lease, if you have any issues, any problems, if you don't want to live there anymore, if you don't feel safe, after that month is over, you can talk to your landlord and say, hey, look, listen, I don't want to be here anymore. Your lease is negotiated on a month-to-month basis, so you're not obligated to stay there. But with a year lease or 2, you are obligated to stay there, and if you break that lease, then that those issues of repayment or of payment or sometimes.
Yeah, it's basically stability versus flexibility. Longer leases provide you stability, you know what to expect over that time. But if you want to leave, that might cost you some money. So, for example, my first apartment in Philly, I did a year lease. And after that, I purposely went month to month, even though it cost me a little bit more money, because I knew I was looking for a house and I wanted to be able to get out at any time. So, it really depends on where you are, but you're weighing flexibility of being able to leave whenever you want versus having a set price for a set amount of time. Does that answer your question, Joy?
Yep.
All right, the next section of the lease I want to focus on is the cost of lease. So this is the section where it's going to tell you exactly how much money is owed, what's your rent, when is it due each month. So it might be the 1st, might be the 15th, it could be the 3rd, depending on what moving date you chose. But also if there's any security deposits or first month's rent, all that also will be on this section as well. So this way they don't try to slip something in there. This is where you read through and make sure that you totally understand your obligations. I encourage you, even if you are really smart and you can handle a lot of stuff, have someone else take a second eye at it. Sometimes you get so excited about it being your first or your apartment or whatever that you miss something. So I encourage anyone to have someone else look over, like, hey, does it make sense to you? Because you see the payment schedule, typically they'll put the security deposit there and your first month of rent, but they might try to add another fee in there that you weren't aware of. So that's really why it's really important to kind of look through this a little bit. And sometimes like a little bit of legal language. So you want to make sure that you're not misreading something because it's written in a way to trip you up. So this is the next section, at least, that I find that's really important. I'm gonna pause here and ask Josh. Josh, with your lease experiences, did you have anything that you thought was weird or didn't make sense to you? How'd you read through your lease?
So I actually skipped through a portion of my lease because I was so excited. Like you said, I was so excited to get my first actual apartment. So I went back to Rebecca and I'm just like, hey, I'm looking at my lease, and I realized something that was really weird. It was I'm not allowed to take my landlord to court in front of a jury, and I'm just like, oh, this seems weird. What if something happens? And with a jury, you can appeal to a motion. So I'm just like, that's a little scary. And just needed somebody to explain that process to me, explain what I was responsible for. When I moved in, well, my landlord told me I was only going to be responsible for electric. I came in and that wasn't the case. I'm responsible for electric and gas, and she forgot to put that in my lease. So we had to redo the lease, like we had to like rewrite the lease and do the whole process all over again because she forgot to add that I need to pay gas as well.
Perfect timing. This is where you'll see who's responsible for what. And so as Joshua says, like the landlord and tenant, you can see who's responsible for what. Some apartment buildings, they will have it that you pay a set fee for electricity each month, so you're not responsible for it, or they pull it into your rent. Others are different. So this is definitely an important time to look through and see who owes what. I know my last apartment, I was surprised that I was responsible for snow removal. So that's something like, you know, you might not notice, or even like passing road control, which, you know, a exterminator costs money. So it's something that you definitely want to look through and make sure that you understand what's being expected of you. And also, if your landlord is not following through what they said, then you can help figure it out and problem solve that. So this section is where you get to see who's responsible for what exactly. And if there's something on here that makes sense to you, ask questions. Like, because it's a legally binding document, as Joshua said, because it was written on there, you have to totally redo it. Because otherwise he didn't have to pay for any gas and he could have legally won that argument. So they had to redo this document. So there's definitely a time to pause and figure out, make sure that you know what you're responsible for. Any questions about this section? So moving in is different process altogether. Josh talked a little bit about their process of moving in and how it's not very, it was something that was unexpected. Anyone else had some things they weren't expecting while moving in, or any tips moving in that they experienced that they want to share with other people?
I do. When I was moving from one apartment to the other, the couch like didn't fit in the elevator. So the two guys that I had helping me had to do it through the stairs. And I was so thankful to them. Shout out to Elijah's Cleanouts. Look him up on Instagram. If you need help moving or hauling stuff, he's very great and a reasonable price. But yeah, I wasn't expecting that moving the furniture, like you have to be thoughtful about, can this actually like fit through the door that it's being moved to? Can it fit in my car? I tried to move my dresser and I swore it was going to fit in my car. I measured it and everything, didn't fit. So that means I had to find another way. Right, and some homes are super narrow. So it can get expensive unexpectedly when something doesn't fit and transport the way you think it's going to.
I just wanted to like add something to that as well. Be careful what you buy because as well, Philly homes are very narrow. I remember like going through like the furnishing features of my house because I didn't move anything in except for like my clothes and things. I wanted to buy this cute sectional that I saw and didn't realize where am I going to fit a sectional up my stairs. So unfortunately, I can only fit a love seat up my stairs. So I had to take that into accountability. So I have to try to figure that out. A dresser, I have a lot of clothes, so I wanted a bigger dresser, but I can't fit a bigger dresser in here. So I have two long, like narrow ones. Also, I have to get a lot of my furniture. I'm not the biggest fan of IKEA, but like I have to get IKEA furniture because they come in boxes and you can put them together. So those are all things that you have to think about when you're like moving into an apartment.
Yes, definitely helpful advice is to measure everything and then measure it again. I also ordered a washer dryer that did not fit into my last apartment because I just didn't, I didn't know. I didn't know. So definitely try to measure everything. Um,
You might also be responsible for taking trash out. And so investing in a decent trash can. So if you're taking your trash out and putting it in a trash can that might be in the alley or the backyard, and then having to put the trash in front of the building. And trash cans are actually not inexpensive. They could be 30 or 50 bucks to get a decent sized trash can. And the landlord may require you to have one. So that's another unexpected expense and something to ask about when you're signing your lease and getting ready to move in.
um, we mentioned also earlier about documenting everything before you move in. This way, you can make sure that there's nothing on the walls, because if you do damage something, walls and something moving in, this way you know that, all right, I'm responsible for making sure this gets fixed before I move out. But if something was ready there before you moved in, you want to make sure that you document it so that you're not responsible for that later on, and mention it right away. Don't wait until the end and say, hey, by the way, this was here when I got here. There's no proof of that. So try to document early. Any other move-in tips we would like to share with the group?
I would just say, don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask a lot of questions, like when it's trash day. Again, am I have a trash can? Because when I moved in, I hardly have a trash can, so I just had my trash sitting on my balcony until trash day, and my landlord got very, very upset. So ask a lot of questions. Get to know your neighbors, because they come in handy. Like, you don't have to be like buddy buddy, but I know, like, my neighbor has become like one of my like biggest support. I don't live in the safest neighborhood, and my packages get stolen all the time. So when my neighbor's home, I'm just like, hey, can you keep an eye out for a really expensive package I have coming? Like, that's a really good connection to have when you're like moving into your own apartment too.
Something else to think about when you're moving into your first apartment is to have a spare key somewhere, and give a spare key to a trusted friend. I used to leave a spare key at my office, so like in my desk in case I got locked out, and I had either a neighbor or a family member who had an extra key just in case I got locked out. And so that's something to consider as well. And again, it might only be like $4, but that's an additional expense to add to your move-in list.
I want to go backwards a little bit. Something that I thought I had in the slides, but it's not in there anymore. Has anyone heard of a term called a cosigner? Right. So we mentioned earlier about that they will do a credit check on you, and especially if you're young or you're a teen, and might not have the income they expect. It's helpful to have someone, hopefully a family member or something, that helps you co-sign on the apartment. Typically, this person will have decent credit score and solid income history, so that the landlord knows if that you, for some reason, cannot pay for the rest of your lease, that this person will be help cover the cost of that. It's not a small thing to ask somebody to do. It's very helpful. We have positive relationship with parents and guardians, or aunts and uncles and godparents, or even a mentor. But having a co-signer definitely is very helpful when you're a young renter, because sometimes there's some age discrimination sometimes in this process, and having a co-signer helps validate that you are ready to tackle these expenses.
And
Any
you may
questions
also,
about that?
I was going to add, sorry, Michael, I was going to add, you may not have established credit yet. And landlords are going to want to know if you have credit. And we're going to drop a link into the chat about what credit is and how to build credit and why it's important. But if you yourself don't have credit, and credit in this case is kind of like a guarantee. And so they may want to have a cosigner if you yourself have not established credit yet. Joy, you want to add something?
I was talking about when I rented my first apartment, the landlord said I couldn't rent it unless I had a co-signer. And me and my roommate, we both didn't realize that we needed a co-signer. Her parents were in Nigeria. I asked my dad, and he did not have good credit at the time and could not co-sign for me. I asked my older sister, she could not co-sign for me. And I got really nervous. I was running out of people to ask. And thankfully, I asked a sort of distant aunt, and she co-signed for me. But it was a like, if you ruin my credit score, I'll be very upset with you kind of thing. And it was a little tenuous because she had to co-sign for both me and my roommate, who she didn't know. So if you are able to start establishing credit, getting a credit card, spending a little money on it, paying it off right away, that's really helpful for renting in the future. And then there's a question in the chat.
Anaya asks, do you have credit if you pay your own phone bill under your name? Yes, that is a great way to start establishing credit. You need a credit line to even open up a phone bill. So that is definitely that's definitely a plus in your credit history, especially if you pay every month on time. So that definitely helps. But also with credit score, it's very complicated, and this country doesn't do a great job with credit scores and stuff like that. But the length of how long have you been using credit also matters here, which is why it definitely discriminates against younger people. Because if you just started paying stuff on your own, how are you supposed to have a credit history and build up more credit without having credit? So there are various online programs where you can check your credit score. I know Credit Karma is one of them, but I would say, and I will try to find the link and drop it in the chat, it's better to go directly to the credit unions. So I think TransUnion is one, Experian is another one, because the other free ones, it's free, but they definitely pull your information to help market towards you. So Rebecca's dropping some of those in the chat that you can go check. You're entitled to at least one free credit check every year from each one of these credit unions. I know credit is a really complicated thing. I'm actually right now going to, if I can click and open it, shortly I will drop a link in the chat to a presentation we did previously.
Called the Thanksgiving Company. What we do is that we teach young adults, middle and high school mostly.
Sorry about that. Any other questions that we have? Any general questions we have about anything we talked about today? Any other tips someone find that we didn't cover might be helpful to them? Or Josh, you have anything to add about your experience and what resources were helpful to you while you were looking for an apartment?
Other than just make sure you can afford it. Not really. I was in the habit searching for apartments, looking for like an apartment with the best, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say it wrong. It's like extra add-ons that come with the apartment.
Amenities?
Yes, amenities. Like whether or not my apartment had a washer dryer hookup, or if I had free parking or a gym. Yeah, don't worry about all that stuff for your first apartment. What I would just worry about is the neighborhood that it's in, and if it's close to a bus stop, honestly. Close to like, transportation to work, school, wherever you may go. Right now, my apartment, it wasn't my first choice, but it gets me where I need to go. It's a nice size for my first apartment. I'm right by the Market Frankfurt line, so I can get anywhere in the city within a half an hour. So it just get what works for you in that moment.
Thank you for that. We have a question in chat from Jada. What if you can't find a co-signer? So there's a couple ways that you might have to, if the apartment you really wanted, it was a little bit out of your budget, the top end of your budget, you might have to downgrade a little bit to something that fit close to your budget that your whatever money you're making, more than enough to cover that rent. Also, and before we leave, I will also link to a couple of housing and rental resources that sometimes they have other situations, and that they're not just looking at people just based on their credit score. They're looking at them in a whole more holistic view. They might have a better chance at those kind of apartments as well. But also, that's why I mentioned it's important sometimes to use your network. You might have an aunt or cousin, something that's renting a room or renting a basement that they're willing to, vouch for you. So you may have to use a different resource than your typical route when getting your first apartment. That's a very, like as Joy was telling us, that can be a very real issue sometimes when you have an apartment that you love, but you just can't prove that you can pay for it in whatever outdated way they want you to prove it. That's a great question. Any other questions? And I asked, will there be other meetings like this? Every 2 weeks, we have a different skills for Fab Life workshop. Our next one is how to create a holiday gift under $5, which will be facilitated by Rebecca in person, actually, at the Lucien E. Blackwell Center, Community Center. And every first and third Wednesdays, we'll be doing different, we'll call them Adulting It one-on-one workshops. So if you put your email in the chat, I'll make sure that you get, make sure that we can send you future information.
And follow us on Instagram at Fab Youth Philly, and that way you'll see all of our upcoming work.
All right, so I'm gonna go and gather some links and drop in the chat. In the meantime, if any of our teams or our safety captains who don't have any other questions, you feel free to log off. Please, any Bryn Mawr students, please stick around for a little bit so we can meet you a little bit and answer any questions we have about Fab Youth Philly. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now. And I'm gonna let.
I'm also just, sorry, I'm just going to say thank you to our interpreter, Josh. I realized that we didn't pin you to the screen. I pinned you to my screen, but we didn't pin you to the recording. So that was really helpful for me to watch you sign tonight, but I don't know if we had it